Hey guys, welcome to Friday Night Bible Study. We are studying the second coming and the rapture. We're actually explaining the second coming and the rapture. We're doing a deep dive into eschatology with the focus on, again, comparing and explaining the rapture of the church and then the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, in eschatology, and this is something that is highly debated, okay, in terms of the rapture of the church. And so we are, again, taking the time, and this is an exhaustive study where we are dealing with, um, we're dealing with this subject of eschatology. Now, let me, as I normally do, let me kind of prep this. Eschatology, the study of end times, okay, um, it's not hard. Really, nothing in scriptures is hard, difficult. If you read the scriptures, just read it and then just say, what does the scripture say? What is on the pages? Keep this in mind. It is always the author's, um, it is always the author's job to explain what he's writing. And scripture does just that. Now, our challenge is not to add to scripture. And oftentimes we do that, especially when it comes to eschatology. Now, when we talk about eschatology, the study of end times, we're studying the rapture of the church versus the second coming, what is going on, what happens with the second coming. And all of this centers around is what we call end time prophecies. The end time, what is going, God has prophesied, spoken things concerning the last days, the end days. So we're kind of taking that apart. Now we're studying Matthew 24 and Matthew in the book of Revelation side by side. And the reason why we're doing that is because Jesus, who is teaching both in Revelation, he's giving John the revelation of end times. And then in Matthew 24, he is teaching the disciples about end times. And the layout is similar in both cases. So we're studying them side by side. And like I said, one of the things that I wanted to do was to look at just other scriptures. One of the, I think, biggest problems with any eschatology is the fact where you slice into scriptures, you take scriptures out of their context. So we're trying to look at as many scriptures as we can so that we can get the understanding of what is actually communicating, not only in each individual passage, but the totality of scripture as well. Now, last time we're going to start Revelation chapter 13. And in this study of Revelation 13, it's going to talk about the beast. He's also known as the son of destruction or the son of perdition. He's probably more known as the Antichrist, which really, I can only think of maybe one or two scriptures that refer to him as the Antichrist. Most of the scriptures refer to him as the beast. So we studied before we kind of went back into Daniel, where Daniel talks about the beast. So Daniel's chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 12 talks about the beast. So if you want to kind of refresh yourself with last week's study, you will understand now when we get into chapter 13 what's going on. Now, before I do get into this, I want to I want to study something. We talked about it before. I want to again refresh our minds on this image because it is important to understand the entire setting of the we can say the last days, but also the beast. Now, this was an image there was a dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar, and this is found in Daniel chapter 2. Now, again, last study, we spent a great deal of time in Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, chapter 9, and 12, talking about the beast and then what this image represents, because it is paramount that you understand this prophetic dream here. So Nebuchadnezzar was given a dream. As I said, if you go to Daniel chapter 2, you'll get the background to this. He's given the dream that he doesn't know. He can't explain it. In fact, when he calls his wise men, he doesn't even know what the dream is. So he tells the wise men, and let me back up a little. Daniel, Daniel is recently deported. So you read this in Daniel chapter 1. He's recently deported from Jerusalem, from Jerusalem to Babylon. And then he is chosen to be a part of sort of the rulership under Nebuchadnezzar. With what they found that Daniel and them was very unique, very gifted men. And then of course, when this dream happened that God gave Nebuchadnezzar the dream, the wise men who later would become Daniel's nemesis, just like today, people who call themselves prophets, people who call themselves spiritualists, and they're fakes. And there was a whole group of them during this time. They were fakes. And now it catches up to them because Nebuchadnezzar says, I don't know what the dream is, but I know I dreamed a dream. Now, I think all of us probably at some time, and I'm going to at least say, especially when you get older, you know that there's something there, but it's just not at the forefront of your mind. Right? It's like, I know it's there. It's right there. And I can't, right? So he said, but if you tell me the dream, then I know you could tell me the interpretation. They couldn't. He orders their execution. Daniel's kind of sitting back and go, hey, what's going on? And sort of the head guard says, hey, the king has ordered all you guys' execution. Daniel said, I'll tell you what, give me a little time. I'm going to go seek my God, and he's going to give me an interpretation. And that's what happened. He goes before the king, and he says, I'll tell you the interpretation. He throws a little dig at the wise men. He says, can your wise men tell you the dream? So he tells him the dream, and then he tells him the interpretation. Now, another key is that really the entire book of Daniel is about this dream, especially when you get into chapters 7 on. It is further explaining, further interpretation of this dream. So the dream it is a prophetic picture. You see a human form. Okay, this dream represents a human form or man's time on earth. And what Daniel saw was 5 world dominating kingdoms from Nebuchadnezzar's time until the second coming of Jesus Christ. And this is why I think this is very important to understand in understanding biblical prophecy. Now, if you remember, I said that when you get into the section of the Old Testament, the writings of the prophets, as they're called, you will find that one of the primary purposes of these books is they're giving prophecy. First, prophecy of coming judgment of Israel because of their sin. And we see this is why Daniel is in Babylon, because those prophecies, after hundreds of years, have finally come to pass. Okay. But then also with the prophecies, you see that God also reveals his plan and purpose for the nation of Israel, what's going to happen to them even beyond the 70-year exile. Okay? So then you see God's planned, future plans for Israel in the prophecy. Then you also see God's prophecies concerning judgment of sinful mankind, of the sinful nations. Okay, that's when you're reading through the Old Testament prophecies, this is what's going to be unfolded. Now, Daniel received this prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar received this dream, and it is a prophetic dream, a time scale. In other words, this dream takes us all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And this is extremely important. So you have the head of gold, which is the kingdom of Babylon during Nebuchadnezzar's day. Then you have and these are all kingdoms. So keep that in mind. 5 world ruling, that they rule the entire earth. And before this time, what you had always seen before this time, there have been mighty empires such as the Assyrian and the Egyptians, to name a couple, but they did not rule the earth. These kingdoms here will dominate. They will rule the entire world. So first was Babylon, which God said was the greatest of these 5 kingdoms. Excuse me. And then you have the chest and arms of silver, which is the kingdoms of the Mede and Persian. And if you read the book of Daniel, if you read Ezra, Jeremiah, that time frame takes place during the kingdom of the Mede and the Persians. And then you have the kingdom of the belly and thighs of bronze, which is the ancient Grecian kingdom, ruled by Alexander the Great. And again, the prophecy on this gives vivid details of how these kingdoms work, even to the point of Alexander's untimely death, and then his kingdom being divided into his four generals. Okay, his 4 generals. All right. Then you have the Roman Empire, which is the legs of iron, and during this kingdom, which ruled the earth, during this kingdom, we also have the time of Jesus, the time of the early church, but more so the time of Jesus, because in Daniel's 70-week prophecy, in the 69th week, that brings us to this time of Jesus, which is during this empire of Rome. Now, what is interesting here is we have a gap in terms of time, because the next kingdom of feet of iron and clay, we don't know what the name of this kingdom is, even though in this picture here, they call it the restored Roman Empire. There's nothing to say that it's the restored Roman Empire. I'm going to say that they probably think this is because of the 2 having iron in them. But this last kingdom, and this is the last ruling world kingdom on earth. So when this kingdom arises, you're truly in the last days, the last of the last days, okay? Now, it is this kingdom that we studied in Daniel 7, 8, 9, and also 12, that Daniel was very intrigued about this particular kingdom, which had the kingdom of the toes, 10 toes, which represents 10 kingdoms on the earth. 10 kingdoms on the earth, okay? We know also the beasts arise from this kingdom and rule. He rules over. We're going to see that in a moment. Now, Daniel also says that in the days of these kingdoms, the King of Kings will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, which is represented by, as you can see here, the rock that was made without hands. And in the prophecy, the rock strikes the human form at its feet. And I said that's timely because from the might, of course, of Jesus' kingdom, he could have struck the image anywhere and destroyed. But it says that he strikes him at his feet. And what's interesting is that he says he strikes the image at his feet and destroys the entire image. In other words, he pulverizes it, and then it's turned to dust, and it's blown away into nothingness. So in the days of these kingdoms, these last 10 kingdoms, that is when the King of Kings will set up his kingdom. He will strike the image and basically seize control of the earth, meaning this: he's destroying man's time, man's rule on this earth, his kingdoms on this earth. That's why this human form represents man, human form. And so the rock destroys this image, and man no longer will rule the earth. Jesus will rule the earth from this time on. So what we have here is a prophetic picture of all the way up, I should say, all the way up until the end of the world, until Jesus comes. That is why, I don't fear something like put it like this: when you hear people talk about global warming and kind of the fear that is kind of pushed with that, well, that's not going to happen. Now, let me just say this: that doesn't mean that we won't have and have to endure natural disasters. We just kind of saw one out in California with the fires that ate up parts of the hillside of the Los Angeles County. We're seeing, I think climate effects that certainly could be traced back to man's greed, what it comes down to. Greed. The fossil fuels spewing stuff in the air. Yes, all of that stuff could be affecting how we live, climate, things like that. I'm not disputing that. But it's not going to destroy the earth. We know the earth is going to be here until, right? The earth is going to be here until Jesus comes. And then these 5 world dominating kingdoms, culminating with the last world dominating kingdoms, 10 nations, under the beast. And then Jesus will destroy the beast. Okay? So you got this prophetic image here. All right. So now let's do this. Let me read again, as I always do. Revelations chapter 24, verse 15. And so we're studying the 7-year tribulation period. It's going to be mentioned here. Now, interesting, Jesus does not call out by name. the beast. Okay, but it is the period of time that we're reading about in Revelation. We're side by side. So Matthew 24, he says, so when you see the abomination that called this desolation, spoken by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. We studied that in detail in Daniel chapter 7, 8, and 9, also and 12. Okay. So he says, when you see this, so when Jesus is speaking, they haven't seen it. And to date, we haven't seen that. So we know what's called Daniel's 70th week, because during the 70th week, he makes a peace pact, a covenant for 7 weeks, and then in the middle of the week, he breaks the covenant. All right. So then he says, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on a housetop must not come down to get his things out of the house. A man in the field must not go back to get his clothes. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in the winter or on the Sabbath, for at that time there will be great tribulation, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. Unless those days were limited, no one would survive, but those days will be limited because of the elect. Now, let me go on and read this further too, because we're talking about then the ride of the beast. He said, if anyone tells you, look, here is the Messiah, or over here, do not believe it. False messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I have told you in advance, so if they tell you, look, he is in the wilderness, don't go out. Look, he is in the inner rooms, don't believe it. For if the lightning comes from the east, it flashes forth to where so will be the coming of the Son of Man. And then where the carcass is, there the vultures will be gathered. Now, so the false prophets, notice he says here, because we're going to come across this in just a moment when we read about the beast. Notice he said false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray. So keep that phrase in mind. Again, Jesus indirectly mentioned here the beast and then also the false prophet. We're going to see another character that's going to be introduced that's never been talked about in any of the prophetic scriptures before, such as that is the false prophet. All right, so let's get in there. Now, I'm going to come back to at another time, probably when we get to the verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days. You can't see that here. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, that's right there would be the second coming. We will get into that. And I'm going to talk about who is the elect. I'll say it now, but I'll go into scripture showing you that this is not talking about the church of Jesus Christ. Remember, we're talking about the rapture. The greater thing that we're talking about is the rapture, the difference in the rapture of the church and the second coming. So at this point, as you can see, everything that we're saying right here is not referring and talking to, or I should say talking about the church. But again, I'm going to swing back around at some point and go deeper into what exactly is the rapture and why what we have discussed in reading here is not the rapture of the church. In other words, the church is not present here. You don't see any resemblance of the church as Jesus here is referring to. Now, some people will point that, well, he's talking about the elect. Well, that's not the church, and I'm going to show that at another time. All right, so Revelations chapter 13, we have been talking about, excuse me, since chapter 11, 12, and 13, basically are three parenthetical chapters. One talks about the two witnesses, And let me kind of go back because there's some interesting things that he does say about, which he didn't say now. We're going to get the details. Let's see. Here it is. Verse 7 says, when they had finished their testimonies. Now, these were the two witnesses we said. We went through this chapter. These are the two witnesses. The two witnesses that will minister. They will prophesy doing the beast, okay? The beast reign. And they will perform signs and wonders. They will torment those on the earth. And then in verse 7, he says, when they had finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them, conquer them, and kill them. Right? So their dead bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, which prophetically is called Sodom and Egypt, which also the Lord was crucified. And the representatives from the people, tribe, language, and nations will view their bodies for 3.5 days, not permitting their bodies to be put into tombs. And those who live on earth will gloat over them and celebrate and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets brought judgment to those who live on the earth. And then I'll just read this just for bonus. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God enters them, and they stood on their feet. So great fear fell on those who saw them. Then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. They went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched them. All right, now let's skip down to verse 13. So, all right, so one of the things we're going to see here, verse 13, verse 1 says, and I saw the beast. Now, the beast represents the ruler, and in Daniel's prophecy, the beast represents the kingdoms. But here the beast is going to be the ruler of the kingdom, this last kingdom. And I saw the beast coming up out of the sea. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Now, so we in Daniel, remember, the one thing that we saw was the interpretation of these 10 horns. He's going to give it again here, but they are 10 kingdoms. So these will be 10 kingdoms that will give their allegiance and their authority to the beast. Okay? And as we saw in Daniel, we really got some good detail about the beast. He is an arrogant person beyond belief. That's why I often say when I see some of these silly tribulation movies, and I will admit they are my guilty pleasures, but theologically they are just all horribly. It's almost like the filmmakers don't even bother to read scripture, because they always present the Antichrist as this hidden dark figure, who doesn't really want to know his true identity or plan. The prophecies totally refute that. He is arrogant above all. He will be blaspheming. He will be prideful. And as you can see, he will be anything except, shy. Okay. So, verse 2 says, the beast I saw was like a leopard. His feet was like a bear, and his mouth was like a lion's mouth. Now get this. The dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Now let's stop, because I want you to see something. Let's go to 2 Thessalonians, and let's get Paul's take on this. Paul's take. Let's see. Let's pick this up from verse 3. Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the apostasy comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction. He opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he sits in God's sanctuary, publicizing that he himself is God. So again, you see, we saw this in Daniel, the arrogancy of this man, you can't measure. He said, don't you remember when I was still with you, I told you about this, and now you know what currently restrains him, so that he will be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness is at work, but the one who now restraining will do so until he is out of the way. Now get this, and then the lawless one will be revealed. Now understand the sequence here that Paul is teaching. One, before the day of the Lord comes, which means the day of God's wrath, the man of sin, the apostasy, and the man of sin has to be revealed. Now, there is something that's stopping the man of sin of being revealed, the one who is restraining. Now, there's much debate about who's the restrainer. Some people say the Holy Spirit, some people say the church. I'll just stick with the simplicity of the scripture. He is restraining. Whoever he is restraining until he is removed. And then he says, then the lawless one will be revealed. Now get this. The Lord Jesus will destroy him with the breath of his mouth and will bring him to nothing with the brightness of his coming. So keep this in mind. The man of sin will be here for 7 years. He will make a covenant with many for 7 years, but he will break the covenant in the middle of the 7 years. That is called the abomination that makes desolate that Jesus spoke about in Matthew 24. Okay? So in other words, the 7-year tribulation period cannot begin until he who is restraining is removed out of the way. And then the day of the Lord cannot come, or the second coming cannot come until he is revealed, because the Lord is going to destroy him with the breath of his mouth and will bring him to nothing with the brightness of his coming. We will study that in detail in Revelations chapter 19, if you want to look ahead. Look at verse 9, though. Look at verse 9. The coming of the lawless one is based on Satan's working with all kinds of miracles, signs, and wonders, and with every unrighteous deception among those who are perishing. They perish because they do not accept the love of the truth. In order to be saved, for this reason, God sends them strong delusion so that they will believe what is false. So that all will be condemned, those who did not believe, believe the truth, but enjoyed unrighteousness. Okay, so notice Paul, and then you see this continuity of thought. Jesus said it, Paul, and then also John, the Revelator. Okay, so now he says, verse 2 again, the beast I saw was like a leopard, and then his feet was like a bear, and his mouth was like a lion's mouth. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. So in other words, his coming will be by the working of Satan. And then look at verse 3. One of his head. Now remember, this is very interesting here. Let me read this, and then I'm going to come back. One of his heads appeared to be fatally wounded, but his fatal wound was healed. Now get this, the whole earth was amazed and followed the beast. Now, you will hear this, that a lot of people think what this is talking about is that the Antichrist will be shot in the head, and that he will be dead, and then that he will be resurrected kind of like in a dark way, like Jesus. Now, the problem with that is that that's not, what is the head here in context? That the head that he is referring to is one of the 10 horns. So that's what he is referring to, right? Now look up at verse 1 again. He had 10 horns and 7 heads. 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. Okay, so again, it's not him personally. So he's going to suffer some kind of, you can think, military defeat. It would appear so, but he's going to recover from that. And then the whole earth will be amazed, and they will follow the beast. Look at verse 4. Now, by the way, we kind of get a glimpse. I'm going to meddle. 4:1. We get a glimpse of this in our current political climate. How people are just going after 47. Now, as I kind of said this before, in no way do I think that 47 is the beast. One, I don't think he's that smart, and and the characteristics, though he is arrogant, it certainly do not come anywhere close to what we are reading here. Now you may say, well, it certainly could develop later. True, but they're not now. And remember, this person will rule the earth. Even though he does have aspirations, it does seem like, to take over the world. Him and the other president, right, will seem that they have aspirations to take over the world. This man will actually do it. He will have the means, he will have the power, he will have the spiritual backing. Oh, excuse me. He will have the spiritual backing. All right. So anyway, they will worship. Now, get this, verse 4. So the whole earth will be amazed because of this feat that he accomplished. But look at verse 4. And here's something that's going to be interesting. Again, this is why I don't think we're living in this time, besides the fact we're not in the tribulation period. Even though I do know that some people think we are in the tribulation period. But again, you can only think that if you ignore a lot of other details about the tribulation period. All right, verse 4 says, they worship the dragon because he gave authority to the beast. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to wage war against him. So again, this is I think the context of the fatal wound is one of a military, what may seem to be a defeat. But notice here, they worship the dragon. And this shouldn't, understand the time in which we are living in, the end of the end days, when complete ungodliness will permeate. Remember, Jesus said that, well, we didn't read this, but he did say this. If you go down in Matthew 24, that the coming of the Son of Man will be like the days of Noah. What that signifies is we're talking about something that is completely so ungodly that you will see this kind of ungodly manifestation. Now, during this period of time, we live in a time where there's a lot of pills around people. But when you peel that away, you'll see the true sin nature. The true sin nature. That people won't even pretend. They won't even pretend. So he says they will worship the dragon. Of course, the dragon is Satan, the devil. And then they worship the beast, saying who was like the beast, who was able to wage war against him. And then it says that the mouth was given to him to speak boasts and blasphemies. And he was also given authority to act for 42 months. Now, this 42 months is about 3.5 years. So when we go back to Daniel's, the 70th week, we see here that the abomination that makes desolation begins at that 3.5 year mark, which also triggers this unbelievable ungodliness and war and persecution against not only Israel, but also those who call on the name of the Lord. So he says he begins to speak blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his dwelling, those who dwell in heaven. And he was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them. Now the saints are simply the called out ones, those who call on the name of the Lord. For it says, and he was permitted to wage war against the saints and to conquer them. He was also given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. All those who live on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name is not written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slaughtered. Now, this book we see from time to time in Scripture. There's actually two books. Well, it might even be several books. One book is, as we can see here, the book of life that the names are written in there. Now, of course, the question always arises, are these names written in the book as a matter of predestination? Or are these names written in as people get saved? But notice he says here that the names were written before the foundation of the world. Okay, so I'm not going to go into deep dive with that because, again, the scriptures does it. But notice what he says right here. Here is the reference point, that the names of the people, so those that will be deceived, will be the ones whose names are not written in the book of life or the foundation of the world. Okay? And he doesn't give the criteria for how God wrote the names. Okay? So then he says in verse 9, if anyone has an ear, he should listen. If anyone is destined for captivity, into captivity he goes. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This demands the perseverance and faith of the saints. During this period of time, there will be such a slaughter. And I'm going to also take another dig at some of these silly Christian movies where they're going to have a tribulation force that's going to try to take down the Antichrist, expose the mark, get the codes to the mark of the beast, and take it down. No, you're going to be busy trying to get your head chopped off. Okay. All right. But I do admit they are my guilty pleasures. Okay. Verse 11. I saw another beast. Now, this is one of the first things that we say that we're going to see something, a new character just introduced. We don't see him in any of the other prophecies other than Jesus' vague prophecies, false prophets, right? Leading the people, showing signs and wonders. But notice this. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. He had two horns like a lamb, but he sounded like a dragon. He exercised all the authority of the first beast on his behalf and compels the earth and those who live on it to worship the first beast whose fatal wound was healed. He also performs great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in front of people. Now, as far as the signs and wonders, let me just kind of remind you that if you want to look at what kind of power Satan could have, if God permitted. For example, the book of Job gives us an example of that, where God permitted Satan to test Job. And as a result, Satan, through men, they took away all of his wealth. But you also see certain weather patterns happening. Lightning strikes, like they say fire, but lightning strikes come down. So the point is that, so there is some ability of Satan, however, that is restrained by God and only allowed by God. And during this period of time, God allows it. Remember, he said he's permitted. So here's this false prophet who performs great signs, verse 13, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in front of people. He deceives those who live on the earth because of the signs that he is permitted to perform on the behalf of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image of the beast who had the sword wound and yet lived. He was permitted to give a spirit to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could both speak and cause whoever would not worship the beast, worship the image of the beast, to be killed. Okay. Now, what this image would be, we don't know. We can probably surmise of some of the technology today. For example, what's going on with AI, robots that, that will be more than sex toys for men, okay? But the technology is just growing in a sense by leaps and bounds. So this image with the, could have life, right? We already kind of get an image of what that could be. And notice he said that anyone who would not worship the image of the beast. Now, another thing we had, because we don't have to be so grandiose, is when you go back to the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, I think it's the 3rd chapter of the book of Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar, and by the way, Nebuchadnezzar, remember, could have been, but he wasn't. He was a great king who ruled the earth. Daniel even himself said, God made you that you're the greatest kingdom that's ever lived. That got to Nebuchadnezzar's head. He always was an arrogant person, to the point that he had this, like, I think it's 90 foot tall image built. And then they had everybody come from all over the kingdoms, his territories, and then he ordered them to worship that statue. Now, that statue did not have life. The difference is that statue was just that, a statue, but he said, worship it. And everybody bowed down and worshiped it except Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Which, of course, in this great sea of crowds, you would stand out. And then, of course, as I said, their nemesis went and snitched. Even though you didn't have to really snitch, you can just really look. Says, look, they're the only ones standing. So now we're going to see an even greater image, one that will speak, one that would have a life like to it, right? It both can speak. Notice that. And then it says, whoever doesn't worship will be killed, actually killed. And the difference is that there's not going to be like a burning the fiery furnace. This time, people will be martyred beyond belief, the saints. Verse 16, and he requires everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he has the mark, the beast's name, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. The one who has understanding must calculate that the number of the beast, because it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, this has become quite popular, 666. And anybody that has 3 names, I remember when I was a young man, a young Christian, when Ronald Reagan was president, and people were like, oh my God, he's the Antichrist, because I think it's Ronald Wilson Reagan or something like that. 3, each has 6 letters, so therefore 666. Of course, he did not turn out to be the Antichrist. And again, you will not have to speculate about the Antichrist. Okay, you won't. So the mark, however, of the beast. Now, again, people think it's going to be a computer chip that's going to be inserted into your hand. Now, the reason why I say that is because anytime you have any kind of technology, people are easily scared. Oh my God, I'm going to take the mark. What are a couple of things we need to know about taking the mark? Like, one, the mark is not, you're not going to take the mark accidentally, right? In other words, people like take the mark and all of a sudden, oh my God, what have I done? No. The people here, as you can see, hate God and worship not only the beast, but remember, they worship Satan himself. So there is a pure evil, a pure hatred in everyone. Taking the mark is a statement against God. Taking the mark, okay? And so, it's again, I'm just always laughing at the tribulation movies, how, you got usually the protagonist who's not a Christian, but she's not going to take the mark. Why? And that's not the picture that you have right there. People who do not take the mark will be martyred. And those who take the mark, there's not going to be this, wrestling in their consciousness. Oh no, God, should I do it or should I not do it? It is a time of pure, ungodly, sinful hatred towards God. So people who take the mark will do so because they hate God. It is allegiance. Okay? Now, as far as the mark itself, we don't know what it could be now. And I say that again because I think there's some kind of technology that people can insert in your hand, and it could act as like a credit card like an identifier. Some people are afraid that that's the mark of the beast. Trust me, the mark of the beast will not. They will not secretly kind of induce you to take the mark. No. You're going to take the mark or you're going to be killed. He's just that arrogant. Now, my thing is, I don't want anything inserted in my wrist anyway. But the mark could be just as simple as a stamp. Okay. And remember back in chapter 7, we saw that the 144,000 were sealed. You can say there was a mark. In the book of Ezekiel, we have where people are sealed. There was a mark put on the children of Israel, certain children of Israel. So in other words, the mark itself wasn't something new. And the fact that Satan is copying God in that respect, because believe it or not, he really just wants to be God. Okay, if you go back to Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 7, one of the seven I wills of Lucifer was, I will be like the Most High God. So in reality, Satan is not even original. So again, the idea here is that, again, during this time, that no one will be able to buy or sell unless he receives the mark. And everyone who is in the kingdom at this time, meaning the kingdom of the beast, will take the mark willingly. They're not going to be like, oh my God, my eternal soul. No. People are going, the darkness, the sinfulness will be so great. People will willingly do it. They will really take the mark. So again, during the last 3.5 year period of the tribulation period would be the most severe, as we're going to see also when we get into the last set of judgments, but also his reign would be severe. I mean, especially against the saints. So, all right, guys, that's the beast. That's the chapter on the beast. We will get into chapter 14 and move on next week as we go through the book of Revelation during this tribulation period of time, during, the last period of you can say, man's rule on earth. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the Bible Plain and Simple. And if you have any thoughts or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in our next Friday for Friday Night Bible Study, where we talk about the rapture and the second coming explained. All right, see you next week.